It's the Real News Network, and I'm Greg Wilpert in Baltimore. Last Saturday, tens of thousands took to the streets in Berlin, Germany, to protest in favor of expropriating the city's largest landlords. The proposal to turn privately owned apartment buildings over to public ownership is happening in response to rapidly rising rents in Berlin, which have increased by over 20% in the past 2 years, faster than any other city in the world. Activists are in the process of collecting signatures for the expropriation campaign to force the city government to respond to the proposal. If they don't respond, the plan is to collect more signatures in order to put the issue to the electorate in a referendum. Joining me now from Berlin is Thomas McGath. He's one of the spokespeople for Deutsche Wohnen enteignen, the main group behind the expropriation campaign. Thanks for joining us today, Thomas.
Hi, thanks for having me, Greg. Good to be here.
So tell us more about what your organization is hoping to achieve. How many companies and how many apartments do you think could be expropriated in Berlin? And how would this work concretely?
Sure. So our campaign is basically a grassroots citizen initiative that's campaigning for a referendum from the state of Berlin to expropriate mega landlords in the city. So the basic threshold for the law is that any company that has over 3,000 apartments would be expropriated. At the moment, this is about 9 companies within Berlin. And the biggest of them is, of course, Deutsche Wohnen, which has something like 110,000 apartments. Altogether, though, it's around 240,000 apartments. So it's not something to actually just shake a stick at. It's quite a lot of apartments. In terms of the campaign itself, so Berlin has some very cool laws that allow for direct democracy. According to Berlin law, once you pass a referendum, basically, once it goes to vote for the citizens, the Senate then is given the task of creating a law. And once that becomes law, these apartments will then come into public hand. So underpinning the entire initiative is actually a desire for creating a much more strong and viable public housing sector within Berlin. At the moment, there's something around 300,000 apartments that are actually owned by the city. They are run as independent companies that are managed somewhat democratically, not enough in our opinion. However, it's very important for the social fabric of the city that these apartments exist. Otherwise, most people would not have access to affordable housing, which currently right now is actually, I would say, at an extreme lack at the moment.
Now, I mentioned that rents in Berlin have been rising faster than anywhere else, but they started from a relatively low level. And as far as capitals go, it is still cheaper than most other capitals in Western Europe. So why would you say is this action really needed? I mean, that's been one of the criticisms that some people have levied against it.
Sure. So a bit of history. Berlin has kind of been seen as the cheap, affordable city within Germany. So Klaus Wowereit called it aber sexy, so which translates to poor but sexy. So it's been kind of this bohemian city where a lot of people have moved to in their college years, after their years. David Bowie lived here for some time in the 70s as kind of like his own oasis away from things in the UK. The issue here is just the speed, I would say, and the rapid rent raises. So it's something that's really, I would say, almost unprecedented in Germany, actually. So the rent has actually doubled in the last 10 years. It's more faster than any other city in the country. And right now, it's something that's so dramatic that wages are just not keeping pace. So there's quite a lot of working class people in Berlin that are suffering under this new, I would say, housing regime. And for them, it's not enough to just build more. They have a real issue right now with an existential need for affordable housing and somebody to protect them from, I would say, the wills of and the whims of the market.
So Deutsche Wohnen itself, owns over 100,000 apartments in Berlin, and they say that expropriating them won't change rent laws or construct more apartments. In other words, they say expropriation won't make much of a difference. Now, how do you respond to that argument?
So from our side, it's about actually stopping and keeping rents affordable. For us, as I mentioned, it's all about this idea of socialization of housing as well. So for us, it's all about decommodifying housing and making it affordable for everybody. On average, the state-owned apartments in the city are much more affordable than apartments in with companies like Deutsche Vonovia and ADO, which is some of the other big ones as well. So for us, we think it's much more fair. When it comes to these organizations, they have much more, I would say, need to answer to the public, and there's much more accountability. So within the Senate, there's people that have oversight over these companies as well. So it's a much more democratic process rather than just, as I mentioned, the whims of the markets. I also think what's very unique about our referendum is that we actually are actively promoting a democratization of housing within this company as well. So when the new apartments are brought into public hands, there will be an Institute of Public Law that is created. And we have actually called for democratic governance structures within this Institute of Public Public Law, and it will be managed by a democratically elected council that is made up of majority of renters and workers with 2 representatives from the Berlin Senate. So for us, we see it as a much more accountable institution rather than these stock market companies that are actually have profit as their only interest.
Now, finally, some critics are concerned that the expropriation would be too costly for the city. If as many as 240,000 apartments are turned over to public ownership, some estimates are that it could cost as much as $40 billion or 36 billion euros. What do you think? Is this really feasible for the city of Berlin?
Well, I think we have a pretty clear answer to that. It's really a matter of political will. So in the German Constitution, in Article 15, it states explicitly that any compensation amount is to be determined by the law. So here, I believe there's been several calculations about this. The Senate did their own calculation. However, they made a mistake in their calculation and they over-calculated it by about 10 billion. So we have actually done our own compensation estimates, and we range it anywhere from around 3 billion to 18 billion. And in terms of financing, we actually say it's not that bad actually. So it's completely affordable if you look at it from a financial perspective. So there's ways to do this where it could actually be budget neutral. So if you actually were to have this set up long term and financed through direct rent from the institute, it would actually be budget neutral. So we don't see that as an issue.
Okay. One last question. How are the political parties reacting to this? I mean, this seems to be an independent initiative, but of course, Berlin, Germany has 6, 7 different political parties. How are some of the main ones reacting to this proposal?
Well, I think in German politics, just like any other country, you have left and right-wing parties. The right has been extremely against this, to be honest. So even the CDU has come out explicitly. Merkel came out against it a couple of days ago. They see it as kind of an intrusion upon the markets, that it is really shaking at the core of the property rights that are enshrined in the German constitution. However, if you look at the left, even the center-left SPD, there is actually quite a lot of resonance within the membership of the party. So the leaders themselves have actually taken a step back and been a bit more hesitant to endorse this. However, within the SPD and the Greens, there's been quite a lot of support, I would say, from the memberships. Die Linke is actually the only party right now that's actively supporting this, but we also see that as a net positive. So they are also in the coalition government in Berlin as well. So they are actively promoting it. They have signature lists in their offices around the city. And they've made it one of their campaign issues, I think, for the EU election as well. So we see that as positive. However, I think it's necessary in a thriving democracy to have this kind of citizens' initiatives that keep politicians honest and keep them, I would say, listening to the will of the people.
Okay. Well, as a former Berliner, I can say this sounds like a very exciting initiative, and we'll continue to pay attention to see how it develops. But we're going to have to leave it there for now. I was speaking to Thomas McGath of Deutsche Wohnen in Eigenen. Thanks again, Thomas, for having joined us today.
Great. Thank you so much.
And thank you for joining the Real News Network.